is you just do the writing bit, you're not supposed to do the talking bit, and I'm generally quite bad at it. Yeah, so thanks to everyone for coming, thanks to everyone who's buying books, that's lovely. Thanks especially obviously to Angel for actually making this all happen. To address the elephant in the room, it's a rather weird time to be publishing a book about Russian people during a war, and I'm very conscious of that. I did write this book quite a while ago, so it's not, you know, I'm not a secret Putin apologist or anything. In my day job, I am actually working with Ukrainian refugees in Romania, so like I've got cred. So don't blame me and don't think that I'm like a secret oligarch or anything, 'cause I'm really not. So I actually missed the start of Angel's introduction because I was sat outside trying to decide which bit to read, but I assume that she gave a kind of background of what the book's about. So the first performance of Shostakovich's symphony during the besieged city of Leningrad in 1942. And it follows the story of a number of musicians who came together to play in this orchestra, and under great odds of, they just lived through a winter of starvation, and the city was still being regularly shelled. It was a bad time. And the bit that I'm going to try and read is it's from the perspective of one of the protagonists, Katya. Katya lost both her children at the start of the war. It's not a spoiler, that happens right at the start. It gets more cheerful from there. And she's in this part, she's listening to the broadcast of the actual first performance, which was performed outside the city. So it's on the radio and everyone in the city is sort of clustered around and listening to it. Deep breath. Before the winter, Katya had put her violin away, wrapped it in an old coat of Tanya's, that's her daughter, pushed it to the back of the shelf. She had pushed the thought of it back too, down inside herself, farther down even than the girls, tucked behind her heart. She wasn't punishing herself. She was sure that Lydia had been wrong about that. It was just that the violin was an access to joy that she didn't deserve. In the dim light of her bedroom, the clean skin at Katya's wrists kindled and glowed when she reached for the bundle on the shelf. She didn't think that she could have brought herself to touch it before she had washed. Tanya's coat. It still held the scent of her faintly, probably because it had been worn so often, the fresh smell of soap, pencil shavings, and the tang of snow. The last time Tanya had worn it, the start of the previous winter, her arms had poked 3 inches past the end of the sleeves, and Katya had put it away for Nadia to grow into. She laid the bundle on the bed and knelt beside it, unwrapping the cloth, exposing the case. There had been a time when her fingers would nag her to play, when music would erupt inside her and she couldn't rest until she had given it voice. Then came the war, and then came the winter, when the thought of music had made her feel so fragile, as if she could crack wide open with the bitter beauty of it. In the coldest months, there had been a group of musicians in an apartment on a street I can't pronounce reliably. They would play together, the tattered ends of their melodies reaching the streets, and Katya had started to walk a block out of her way just to avoid hearing them. She had felt sick and glad when Lydia had told her that they had fallen silent. She opened the case. The felt bed on which the violin lay was deep blue and lustrous, a colour that Katya hadn't seen for such a long time, something that she could barely have imagined with her eyes closed. The instrument itself was the colour of warm honey. Katya lowered her head, her nose close to the strings, and breathed in the piney scent of rosin. Close up, she could see the shower of dust that lay under the strings and the calligraphic loops of the wood grain under the thick layer of varnish. It was a dream, this artifact, something so beautiful and so self-indulgent. Katya picked up the violin, easing it free of the case. She was afraid to touch it. It felt like something living, something too precious, needing care that she was unable to give it. Her heart crashed in her chest and her hands trembled. How could it be that she had once handled it so easily, almost as if it were part of her own body? When she felt calm enough, Katya cradled the scroll of her violin, running her hand over the pegs. She took the bow in her fingertips, tightening the horsehair until it was ready to play. Attaching the chin rest, she lifted the violin and closed her eyes. The orchestral opening of the Andante movement of Tchaikovsky's D major violin concerto. It came from somewhere inside her, but not inside her head, somewhere deeper, behind her ribs, lodged between her lungs, throbbing with every breath. Katya raised her right hand, holding her bow. It did not touch the strings. The fingers of her left hand started to move, and she heard the tap-tap sound of them clicking against the fingerboard, while the memory swelled inside her, riding on her blood, her pulse the surest metronome she knew. It was the sort of piece that she had always felt slightly ashamed of liking, over-emotional and slushy. The crisp, clean precision of the Baroque was more pleasing, the feeling that she was picking up a challenge that had been thrown down. Yet at that moment, she couldn't imagine ever playing something that hadn't been composed by a Russian. As suddenly as it had started, the music fell away and Katya was left feeling foolish, holding an instrument that she didn't understand, her body in a position that she barely recognized. Her arms ached and she moved quickly to lay down the violin and bow before she dropped them. She'd been stupid, she knew. Months of starvation had left her so depleted that any unnecessary movement could exhaust her to the core. To pick up the violin was one thing, but to pretend to play, As soon as she felt safe to do so, she put the violin back in its case, careful to wipe the strings clean of rosin, although the bow hadn't touched them. Now put it back on the shelf, Katya told herself. Put it back. She didn't move. From outside her bedroom door, from the radio set, and from the city I can't reliably pronounce, there came a distinct sound of applause.